big treat. I'm sorry, you have a question?
No, a reminder, it would be good if everybody turned.
Oh, yes. Please silence your cell phones. We would appreciate that. It just interrupts what's going on. Thank you for reminding me. All right. Most of us here know Jack, but most of us don't know the whole Jack. So we're expecting him to really reveal everything tonight, Jack.
No.
Almost everything, Jack. All right. As you know, Jack is aren't you one of the first people here?
Yeah,
Early
almost
on.
4 years.
Okay. All right. Now, before Jack coming here, he did have another life, and I'd like him to introduce his children who are here and the grandson. Is that
I got
correct?
3 children. That's my oldest daughter, my son, and I got another daughter who just raised her hand, the grandson, Joe. So I got
Welcome. Welcome. So glad you could be here. Yes, welcome.
We're gonna learn things we didn't know.
Huh?
We're gonna learn things we didn't know.
All right. And I think with that, I give you Jack Shore.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
You hear me? Okay. I welcome everybody. I have a story to tell. I hope you'll enjoy it. There are many ramifications to the story. My life, my 2 wives, my children, grandchildren, and so forth. I'd like to start with the fact that I was born in 1926, which puts me 95, I guess. But I mention that because 1926 was kind of a good year, not too good, but it was a good year in the sense that I didn't become 18 until 1944, which meant I wasn't drafted in the Army at an earlier age. So that's the beginning. Anyway, I grew up in a very poor family. I finally had occasion to see my birth certificate when I was in the Navy, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. The reason I mentioned my birth certificate is because it said I was the 6th of 9 children born alive. Well, that surprised me because I only knew 3. There were 3 half-children. I mentioned half-children because my wife, my mother, had 3 husbands. And there were children from the first 2 husbands, but there were no children from the 3rd except myself. And then I'll tell you about the child that we discovered later. But at that moment, is everything okay?
Yeah.
But at that moment, I just knew of the 3 children, 3 half-children. So I was born into a family that had 3 half-children, but there was one person missing in the family, and there was a father. I had a father in the sense that he gave birth to myself, and but he left at a very early age, a couple of years after I was born. I have to say that specifically because the person that you're going to hear about later, who found me in my later years, happened to be born after me. So he was around a little while. The person involved, I'll tell you about, was a year younger than I was. So therefore I was born. Now, I was born into a very poor family with no father, and I don't have no recollection of my life prior to the age of 10 or 12. Now you say that's odd. Well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. Now, one of the reasons that I had no recollection is that I was in analysis for 4 years at some stage in my life, and one of the things he suggested that was possible is I have no recollection because I was afraid of being adopted out. I remember I said it was the sixth of 9 children born alive, and I only knew of 3. So apparently there were children that were adopted out. And then maybe I was afraid of being adopted out, and therefore I withdrew. I'm using that only because I have no other explanation. So as I grew up, and as I said, I have very few recollections. The only recollection I consciously have is when I was 6 years old, I saw a sign on my house. And what was the sign? It was a quarantine sign, because in those days, when you got the measles or mumps, whatever it was, there was a sign put on your house, quarantine. Now that's all I remember prior to maybe the age of 10 or 11. So, because the suggestion was that I was afraid of being adopted out, I blanked out all those years. I never had a birthday party. I wouldn't even know one existed. I only lived with my mother. Now, I told you that I was the 6th of 9 children. Well, the 3 that I knew were half brothers and sisters, and one was born in 1910. I say 1910 because my mother came over from Russia in 1909. And so she was about 18 or 19 at the time when she came over. And that was with her first husband, and I know of one child from that first husband who was roughly 16 or 17 years older than I was. So, and I knew him for a very brief time because he soon moved to Washington. I remember him at the age of 12 and moving to Washington. And I have one other recollection of my brother, and that was, you know how he earned a living during the recession? He was in dance marathons. You may have seen the movie, they shoot horses, don't they? Well, my brother earned money in dance marathons. And he ultimately had a dance studio. He was a good dancer, and I was a good dancer in my youth also. But anyway, my brother was a good dancer. He had a dance studio. And unfortunately, he was killed in World War II. So I never really knew him at all. Now I have a sister who's 10 years older than I was. My sister was a fascinating character, and I will mention her more later as to what happened to her. But my sister, who was very bright, was valedictorian of her high school class, but she couldn't go to college. Why not? She had to support us. We had no support. There was no father, so my sister took on the support. And she supported us for quite a while. I recall, I'm the only one that was living at home with my mother. So remember, these children I talk about were not living with me. My brother, who was a few years older than I was, he went into the civil CCC, if you may remember. Back in those days, you could go to the Civil Conservation Corps, and he went into the Civil Conservation Corps, and he would send us home $50 a month so we could buy a house. We bought a house. My mother and I lived in a house. It was a very small house, and you know how we heated that house? We had a stove in the living room and a garage, not a garage, a shed in the backyard. And I would go into the backyard and get the coal from the shed, bring it into the house, put it in the stove in the living room, and that was our heat. So you can imagine that our life was not the greatest, but I have to say, in deference to my mother, she was I don't want to use the word strange, because that's not a good word for her, but anyway, my mother came over from Russia, and she never learned to read or write. Now, that's strange, isn't it? She died at the age of 60-something, I'll get to that in a moment, but she never learned to read or write, and she unfortunately had a personality in which she alienated all her children. So when they got old enough, they left home. Now, I was very sad about this thing, and it dramatically affected my life because I knew nothing about my mother. I knew nothing because they would have nothing to do with my mother. and they wouldn't have anything to do with me. Not that they were terrible people, but their feeling for my mother overcame any relationship that they wanted to have with me. So while I had 3 siblings, I really had 3 half people who lived somewhere else in Toledo, Ohio. By the way, I didn't mention to you, I come from Toledo, Ohio. I ran into somebody here in the building who lived in Toledo, so there were 2 of us here. So any event, I had, since my mother alienated her children, since they wouldn't have anything to do with her, they wouldn't have anything to do with me. So if anybody would ask me any questions about my mother and her prior life, I couldn't answer them, because nobody told me. So I never knew. And this became something that, you know, when you're here at the Carrington, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of time on my hands. So I become introspective, and I try to think of what happened. Well, it was not my fault, but I was very fortunate in that I was born in 1926, and I'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, since my mother alienated my children, since I had no father, now having no father in a Jewish family is a disaster. I had a mother who couldn't learn to read or write. That was another disaster. Because you think of all the Jewish mothers that say, I want my son to be a doctor or a lawyer, push, push, push. Well, my mother couldn't learn to read or write, so education was not a factor in her life. So therefore, I had to struggle on my own. Struggle, I don't want to use that word in the sense, I want to leave you with the impression that my mother took care of me. She made sure I had clothes, I was fed, I was never abused. She took the best care of me she could. Unfortunately, as far as money was concerned, there wasn't any money. So now I get to the fact that I was born in 1926. Well, when I was born in 1926, that means in 1943, I was getting close to where I could be drafted in the Army. And so at that time, I skipped my senior year in high school. Now, I skipped my senior year in high school, not that I was bright, it's just that you would do it. And so I went to the University of Toledo, which cost relatively little for my first semester in college. And because I was 17, I wasn't drafted, but I could get a job. You could earn money. So I was supporting my mother because I could work at the post office, I worked at a machine shop, because there were jobs for 17-year-olds. As I say, being born in 26 had its advantages. So here I am, going to the university. I didn't live there, I just walked to school, of course. And I was in there one day, and somebody said, they're signing up people for the Army STP, ASTP, which means the Army would send you to college and pay you something, or the Navy V-12. The Navy V-12 was signing up people. Well, I was a very shy person, so to speak, but I mention that because I signed up for the ASTP. Why? Because they paid $25 a month more than the Navy V-12 paid, and I could support my mother with $25 more a month. So I signed up for ASTP. Well, fate intervened. How did fate intervene? I went to class, and they said, what'd you sign up for, Jack? I said, I signed up for the ASTP because I can get the, you're crazy. Don't sign up for the ASTP, sign up for V-12. I said, I didn't know any better. You say why? Because I don't know what. So I went back to the registrar and I said, I want to change my designation. He was just filling out a box. So he looked and looked. Now I was a shy, very shy person. I was just ready to say, oh, forget it. Fortunately, he found my application. That changed my life. I mean, if you want to talk about a life-changing event, that changed my life. So how did it change my life? Well, I took the test and I passed it, and I got into the V12 college training program. So the V12 college training program was set up by the Navy because they wanted all of their officers to be college graduates. So I was in the Navy, I was an apprentice seaman, but they sent me to college. They sent me to Illinois Institute of Technology, which was my first exposure to Chicago. I don't know if anybody knew of Illinois Tech in 1944, but it's not a place where you wanted to go to school. It was in tenements, and I have to tell you that one building that had 3 stories, the elevator was run by a cable. So the guy pulled on the cable, they would take us to the 2nd floor or the 3rd floor. So that's how antiquated Illinois Institute of Technology was. But listen, it's a free education, right? I was going in the Navy, I was an apprentice seaman, and I was going to V12. Well, the war ended, and I thought, well, okay, V12 would end. I'd be sent, I'd do something. Well, as I told you, the Navy was very conscious that their officers had to be college graduates. So I stayed in college. As a matter of fact, I have to say that of the 6 or 7 people that came from Toledo to go to IIT, I was the only one that finished. Maybe I was lucky. I wasn't brilliant, don't misunderstand me, but I survived. And I think one of the traits that I have is that I'm a survivor. So I survived Illinois Tech, and I graduated at the age of 19. There was no special reason it was 19. It was only because in those days you went 3 semesters a year. So when you went 3 semesters a year, you didn't have to go a full 4 years. So I was 19 and I graduated. So when I graduated, I got my commission in the Navy. Now I was a naval officer, whatever that means. So it's in the Navy. And I got my discharge. So I was sent home. Okay, I got my discharge and I commissioned, and IIT gave me a degree. So here I am. I am a naval officer in the reserve. I'm a college graduate and so forth. I remember one time I went to get my driver's license and I said, well, I'm a college graduate. Oh, you're not a college graduate. Okay, pass on that. But I was 18, 19, and I went home. Well, for some reason, I decided I would stay in the Naval Reserve. I don't know why, but I decided I'd stay in the Naval Reserve. Now, that was another life-changing moment, okay? I stayed in the Naval Reserve. Well, I had a girlfriend, and then there was a patent office. I joined, I'll have to go back a little bit. I graduated from IIT and I got a job as an engineer at Martin Aircraft Company in Baltimore, Maryland. I didn't like engineering. I would have never chosen it, but it was a free education, so I became an engineer. And therefore, I was sitting in my engineer at my job, and a friend of mine called, a guy I knew in college. Now, mind you, I didn't have a father. I had no one to tell me what to do. I had no guidance. So I got a call from this friend of mine, and he said, I'm in the patent office. Why don't you join the patent office? I said, okay. I didn't like engineering, so I joined the patent office. So I went and joined the patent office. And when you're in the patent office, they said, well, why don't you go to law school? I said, okay. So I said, I'll go to law school. Where should I go? Well, I lived on this side of town, and that's where George Washington University was, and the other side of town was Georgetown. Unfortunately, I chose the one closer to my home, so I went to George Washington University, where I got my law degree. Well, that's your patent office, you got an engineering degree, now you got a law degree, now you're a full-fledged patent attorney, right? I was a full-fledged patent attorney. So in any event, I stayed in the Navy, in the Naval Reserve. I told you that. And then I had the patent office had a Naval Reserve unit, and I joined it, and I said that I would be their welfare officer, so I would be in charge of parties. At that time, I had a girlfriend who worked for a senator. Now, when you work for a senator in Washington, that's a big deal. So as the welfare officer, I call up Ruth, lovely girl. I said, Ruth, let's have a party at the Army-Navy Club. Fine. She called up the Army-Navy Club, and this is Senator Neely's office calling. I'd like to reserve a party for this unit. So they said, whatever we could do for you, Senator Neely. So we had parties. Now, I mentioned that because I was successful at having parties. I was now promoted twice in the Navy. I never knew one end of a ship from another. So I was now a lieutenant, senior grade in the Navy. I was a big deal, except for one thing. I didn't know anything about the Navy. Everybody in the Navy knew more than I did. So now comes another moment of my life. I'm 25 years old. I've graduated law school, passed the bar, all that sort of nonsense. And I get a notice in the mail. Strange notice. It was from a draft board in Toledo, Ohio. And they said, Jack, we don't think you're going to school during the war. It was really very, very civic-minded, or so, whatever it was. And we want to draft you in the Army. I said, see, that's not a very good idea. I don't like that. I was already lieutenant, senior grade in the Navy. They wanted to draft me in the Army as a private. So I said, I got to think of a solution. I had a solution. I called up the Navy Department. I said, this is Lieutenant Shore. I'd like to go back in the Navy. Yeah, but what are we going to do with you? I said, I don't know, that's your job. So they took me back to the Navy. Now I'm lieutenant, senior grade in the Navy. And the draft board can't get a hold of me anymore, right? So the Navy's sitting there with my application, and they said, what are we going to do with them? Because if they sent me to sea, I'd be in charge of 200 men, all of whom would know more than I did, right? I knew nothing. So in their infinite wisdom, they said, we've got just the role for you. We're going to send you to Panama and put you in charge of athletics. So, Lieutenant, senior grade, Shore, went to Panama. I was single then, by the way. And I had a deep-sea fishing boat and 3 golf courses and a PX. And I was living high off the hog, because if anybody knows anything about special services officers, what they do is the officer does nothing and all the enlisted men do all the work. So in the event, I became a special services officer. I went down to Panama. I had a great time. I used to go to all the embassies. That's because I was lieutenant senior grade and a single naval officer in Panama in 1952 was in demand. Great life. And in any event, I spent 18 months in Panama, and they got a notice in the mail that said, we have too many lieutenant senior grades in the Navy, and we want to get rid of some. I said, okay. I got out of the Navy the next day. I didn't want to stay in the Navy. So I got out of the Navy, and I went back to Washington, and I said, well, I'm now a patent attorney, I'm a member of the bar, a big deal of sorts, I guess, and jobs were plentiful, because after the war, everybody wanted to make inventions, and patent attorneys got good jobs. So I went to work for General Electric in their patent department in Schenectady, New York. And nice job, and did very well. And then during the summertime, I figured I've got to meet a woman or do something. Here I am in Schenectady, New York, which is not the garden spot of the country, but Schenectady, New York, so General Electric was. So I went to in the Adirondacks, there was a place where all the single people went to meet other single people, you know, during the war. And I met my future wife, and we were going to play bridge. And fortunately, it rained, so we couldn't play bridge. Thank goodness, she was a terrible bridge player. But we played ping pong, and she was a good ping pong player. So anyway, that's where I met my first wife, who was from New York City. And we subsequently met and got married. And she came to Schenectady to live, and then which was very nice, and that was fine. And then we ultimately, unfortunately, very shortly after we were married, her mother died, which was unfortunate because she was an only child. Not an only child, but she depended on her mother. I don't know if any of you read the book Marjorie Morningstar 100 years ago. Well, that was my wife. She lived in a very fancy apartment house on Central Park West, went to Hunter College, and very fine. Her father had a very interesting job during the Depression. You know what he did? He was in charge of the Millinery Association. Everybody wore hats. And so he had a big job and did very well and so forth. And so we got married and we moved to, I decided I wanted to improve my lot, so I got a job as patent counsel of the J.I. Case Company, which is a large firm equipment company. And I moved to Racine, where we gave birth to Debbie. We moved to Racine and then Milwaukee. She gave birth in Milwaukee, but I was working in Racine. But we got Debbie in Milwaukee. So after being there for a while, I decided the way to get ahead economically in the patent game is to join a private law firm. So, lo and behold, I get a call from a private law firm, and he's interested in hiring me. Now, why was he interested in hiring me? Well, he knew me in the patent office, and he knew I was a good bridge player. In those days, I was. Not now. Melanie outsigns me all the time. Anyway, so he knew I was a good bridge player, so he asked me to join his law firm. So, who am I to say no? I came down to Chicago, joined his law firm. Fortunately, the senior member of that law firm was one of these guys that could sell ice to the Eskimos. He was a tremendous business getter. For those of you who are lawyers, to walk into a law firm and say, don't bring any clients with you, we're too busy, that's unusual. But I brought J.I. Case as a client because I thought maybe at some point I would have to have my own clientele. So anyway, I brought J.I. Case and I joined this law firm. It was a boutique law firm, and all we did was patents and trademarks. Now, you see here Elmo doll. My claim to fame was I patented the Elmo doll. So that I had toy designers as patent as clients, and so that was my claim to fame. So everybody got that and so forth. But so I moved to Chicago with my wife, and I subsequently had 2 other children, Kenny and Andrea, and they were born in Chicago. And so I was here for a while. I started the practice of law. I had a mentor who was the senior partner, who I said could sell Eskimo ice to the Eskimos, and he could get clients. 2 of his clients I'll mention in passing that you've heard of. One is Standard Oil. Now, why did he get Standard Oil? Because one of his partners at the law firm, it was a 2-man law firm, Max Dressler and Ben Schneider. And Ben happened to be the first chemical patent attorney in the chemical field. And so that he got I was talking about Standard Oil. So Standard Oil called up their law firm in Chicago, and they said, I want you to hire Ben Schneider. And the law firm said, he's Jewish. And the president of Standard Oil says, I don't care whether he's Greek or Irish or African American, you hire Ben Schneider. Oh, so he hired Ben Schneider. Ben Schneider went to work, and then he ultimately went on his own. And he got this little guy from the patent office, whose name was Max Dressler, and Max became Schneider and Dressler. Now, Ben Schneider had one other interest in life. He was a yeshiva bookler. He used to study the Torah all day long, and he would find out that every month he was making more money. How am I making money? Now, Max did not tell him that he was working on the side and he was building clients, and so he was splitting the money with Ben because he was his partner, and he brought all these clients in. So he couldn't figure out where the money came, and Max said, "Don't worry about it, we'll take care of it." So Max built up a clientele, and then he started expanding his law firm. And then another client of ours who became a big client, you may have heard of, Johnson & Johnson. General Johnson said to their law firm, "We have this new project of non-woven fibers, I don't bother to explain it to you, and we need the best attorney in the country to do it." He said, "Well, it's Max Dressler, but he's Jewish." And General Johnson did not like that. Any event, Max Dressler became a very good buddy of General Johnson, and needless to say, we did a lot of work for Johnson & Johnson. I'll give you one example. One year, I filed 50 patent applications on disposable diapers. Now that's quite a feat. You can think of 50 ways you can make a disposable diaper. We could have filed more, but we only filed 50. So, in any event, those were two of our clients. We ultimately built a firm. Max built the firm because he wanted to know what's clients.
Dad, pull your mic down. Pull your mic down.
Oh. Are we all yet? Okay. So, any event, Max was a business getter, and unfortunately, but fortunately, I was ahead of my income for my age, or ahead of my age, or whatever it was. And that was a little unfortunate. Why do I say that? Because when I moved to Chicago, I moved to Evanston, and I lived in this house. And a block away, everybody lived in apartments. So all the young lawyers lived in the apartments. I lived in this house. Therefore, I was a distance. It was just a whole different way of life when you live in a house as you take an apartment. So that was unfortunate, because had I lived in the apartments, I've gotten to know many of the young lawyers in Chicago and so forth, and so they all became very successful, a number of them. But in any event, I lived in this house in Evanston. And I have to tell you, I lived in this house in Evanston in 1961. Well, I subsequently found out they had a block party to keep me out, because the person that said he's Jewish, we can't have Jew in Southeast Evanston. And the owner of the apartment said, "Do you want to buy my house?" And they said no. Well, Jack Shore's moving into Evanston, so I moved into Evanston. And while I was in Evanston, I was participatory. I was the chairman of the Human Relations Commission. I was on the Environmental Control Board. So I was president of 2 Jewish community centers. So I did my part, because I enjoyed getting involved. And during my stay in Evanston, by the way, my wife, Edith was her name, she had a talent. One of the talents that she had, we had this Georgian home in Southeast Evanston, which is still there, and she painted it 4 different colors. When she painted it 4 different colors, it became the Painted Lady of the North Shore, won a prize, and she was creative. Of course, among other creativity, she was a docent at the MCA. I'll get to the MCA later. But we had this multicolored home that okay. Well, we had one sad story, because when I think of Andrea back there, because Andrea was born just about the time we moved into this house, and she came back from college, and we were moving out of the house, so she was very sad, because that was the only house she ever knew. But anyway, lived in Evanston for 61 to 87, 26 years, and I subsequently, with my wife and my children, were all in college and so forth, and then we moved down to Watertower. So I'll tell you about Watertower in just a few minutes, but that was our life in Evanston. So I was involved in Evanston activities, and I was doing very well in the patent game, because Max Dressler could sell ice to the Eskimos, so we had clients galore. And you in the legal business know that's the name of the game. And but had a bad feature too, because the bad feature was when Max finally retired, we had to get clients. Well, I'm glad we didn't need him because we were very good at getting clients. He's the one that got them all. So in any event, I was in practice of law in Chicago. Stayed there until I retired. And then I'll give you some insights on what happened. I had two daughters, a son, I told you. And one of the things that happened, as an aside, is they both decided to give birth at the same time. So they were traveling down the street, and I think they ran into each other on Chicago Avenue, where they were both going to the hospital at Northwestern, where they both gave birth. And my wife, who was in public relations, said, aha. So she got it in all the newspapers and everywhere. Sorry, I didn't bring a picture, but my two daughters gave birth on the same day in the same hospital at Northwestern. And that was an eventful day. So that was what happened. But my wife was in PR. I have to go back one step, but I forgot to tell you. My wife went to Hunter College, and after she got out of college, she got a job at a PR firm. And one of the jobs in the PR firm was to write comics or quips or something and get them into papers for actors and actresses. So she was doing that, and one day, someone else came into this office, and he was going to do it too, this little crimply-faced guy. It was Woody Allen. So Woody Allen and my wife, for a very short time, shared an office writing quips for the paper. And I have to go ahead sometime when my wife was pregnant with Kenny, and we were having dinner at Mr. Kelly's, and appearing at Mr. Kelly's was Woody Allen. So Edith had told all these people that, oh yeah, sorry about Woody Allen. Of course, we're sitting there. It ends, the program ends, and she's having stroke-us because there's no Woody Allen. He came, sat down for half an hour and talked to us because they remember their days working at David Albert, a PR office. So she did that, and that was our episode with Woody Allen. Okay, so we're now in Chicago, and we're doing things, and one of the things that I forgot to mention to you early on is that I was fortunate in that physically, I've had good health. Here I am, almost 96, and my main ailment is spinal stenosis, so I can't walk as well. But I had a problem that I alluded to earlier. What was that problem? I said, I don't remember things that happened prior to the age of 12. Well, one of the things that happened to me in those days was I found out, and my analyst verified it, that I had a very narrow range of emotion. Now, I don't know if you've been afflicted with that. I don't know whether you want to call it an affliction. But when you have a very narrow range of emotion, you don't get very excited, you don't get very depressed. So therefore, within that narrow range, you can never have the best meal, seen the best movie, read the best book, because that just doesn't fit within your narrow range. Now, I have a couple of examples of where one gets out of that narrow range, okay? Now, one of the examples was I can go to a movie and cry, okay? Now, why did I cry? Because at that moment, that narrow range of emotion evaporated, and my full emotions existed, and therefore, if the movie was sad and I cried, I'd cry. So that kind of helped. One other time that I cried was my dear son here. We went up to Camp Shive, and he had the misfortune of running into a tree. Whether he was on a sled or something like that, he ran into a tree. And so we were worried about him because he had to have his spleen removed, and we were worried about him. And I cried again because at that moment the emotion was such that the emotional barrier lifted, and I cried. And he survived, and we find out that you really don't need a spleen. So if you ever lose your spleen, don't worry about it. He lost it by running into a tree, and we got him a good doctor, and he's healthy and all that sort of stuff. So that was an episode there. So here I am. So I had this narrow range of emotion, and that, by the way, that combined with that narrow range of emotion, I don't know if it has a bearing or not, but one of the things that I found out in life is that I did not make friends easily. Now, why didn't I make friends easily? And I realized that in order to have a friend, you've got to be a friend. Now, I was shy, and therefore I didn't ask people, well, what's your daughter like? What school does she go to? What's this, what that? Because I thought that I was intruding, and I didn't want to intrude. And by not wanting to intrude, you did not develop relationships, which friends are built. Friends are built on relationships. You know their story. The more you know their story, and the more that they know of your story, the more entwined you became. So therefore, I realized that it took me a long time for my analyst to help me with that. As I told you, he thought he was going to have me for 30 years, like Woody Allen, but after 4 I quit. I had enough. I quit for another reason. They stopped paying the law firm because they picked up all the bills. At the time, they picked up all the medical bills. Well, they did, and so I took 4 years of analysis, 3 days a week. And it was an experience, as I said, but my analyst thought that he would solve all my problems if he had me long enough. Well, 4 years was long enough, and he didn't solve all my problems because I still had those problems. So the range of emotion, plus the fact that I didn't have a father, and I didn't have a mother who was beating on me to be a lawyer or an engineer or something, I just became a survivor. When I say a survivor, I say I went to law school, I went to engineering school. I did not do particularly well because I didn't know the value of education. Some way you've got to learn the values, and values come from your parents or somewhere. And my mother had no idea what education was all about, and so therefore I survived, graduated engineering school, graduated law school. Fortunately, got hired by a law firm that didn't have me to go out and pick up clients because I really wasn't that good at it. And as I said when I joined the firm, don't bring in any more clients. And those of you who are lawyers here, you never hear of that. But in my case, I heard it, and I took care of that. So then, that was part of my medical problem. So then my wife unfortunately died of cancer. My first wife, she was from New York. And we had 43 wonderful years together and left me with 3 children. By the way, I have to mention, I'm very fortunate, probably more fortunate than most people here. I have 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren, and they're all here. So I'm very fortunate they're all here. So that it's worked out well. So then I married, which one is a condo near here that you know. It's what is it? Barclay. So I'm now single, and I'm taking out 3 women from the Barclay. And so whenever I would go into the Barclay, I had to look at the doorman, I'd say, wait, who are you calling? And he'd go, Dimpy, still, he's called it Dimpy, she had dimples. I ended up marrying Dimpy, but I was taking out 3, and as the doorman told me later that I got the best one. So anyway, I married Dimpy. And Dimpy's husband had died of cancer a number of years ago prior to that. And she was an interesting character. I shouldn't use the word character, but she was kind of a character. I was very fortunate in that Debbie was quite different from my first wife. My first wife was a lovely woman, no question about it, and the mother of my children and so forth. But Debbie was more of she's more aggressive. I'll give you an example. She moved, I was living in a water tower at the time, and so she moved in with me to a large apartment, and she said, who lives next door? I said, I don't know who lives next door. And Debbie said, how can you not know who lives next door? She went next door, and she met them, and next door lived a woman with her second husband who became the president of Northeastern University. Now, I mention that because prior to Northwestern University, Northeastern, he taught at Chicago Teachers College. So my second wife had gone to Teachers College. Fortunately, her parents were not wealthy enough to send her to the University of Illinois. So she went to Chicago Teachers College. And this person who was the president of Northeastern had former taught at Chicago Teachers College and was her teacher. Remember, 30 years ago, he was her math teacher, so she went and pulled out all her grades, and she got A's and everything, except she got a B+ in ping pong. That whatever happened. Anyway, she graduated as valedictorian of her class, and I want to skip a moment and I'll go back to that. I'd like to tell the story, the secret. We went to the class reunion at Roosevelt High School. I don't know if any of you went to Roosevelt High School, but Debbie went to Roosevelt High School. She lived in Logan Square, but through machinations, if you knew you were alderman, you could go to Roosevelt High School. So she went to Roosevelt High School. And they had a class reunion, 50-year class reunion, but I said, Debbie, we ought to go to. I'm not from Chicago, but I said, let's go to the class reunion. So we went to the class reunion, and I saw a woman there I knew, who was married for the second time to this gentleman. And we went and talked to her, but the gentleman was very uncomfortable. He just wouldn't talk. So we left, stopped talking to the couple, and I said, Debbie, he didn't talk. He said, you know why he didn't talk? She outwitted him for valedictorian of Roosevelt High School by half a point, and in 50 years he never forgave her. So that was her story. She was always valedictorian. I thought I would like to tell a story about that. And she taught school for a number of years. She decided that she was smarter than that, so she put an ad in the paper. Said, bright young woman, blah, blah, whatever she said, I don't remember. But anyway, she got calls from insurance companies. And the insurance company will hire anybody because they hire you and you bring in business and you're fine. Well, I'll jump ahead. Debbie became the first woman vice president of Prudential Insurance Company. That was quite a feat. Even though she started late in the first year, she was a member of the $1 Million Round Table. So anyway, she was very accomplished there. She was very successful. So now that I'm talking about Dimpy, one of the things she liked to do was gamble. She was not addicted in the sense that, but she liked, so we used to go to Las Vegas maybe 3 times a year. And she would go and play the slot machine. I think she was really very good at it because she would play a machine for a while and she'd say, this isn't working too well. And so she went to another machine. This isn't working. And so ultimately she made money on the slot machines. But her other gambling, not addiction, what she liked was the horses. Dimpy loved to play the horses. So we would go to Florida every year for a number of years, and we would go to Gulfstream. So we went to Gulfstream in the year 2003. We went to Gulfstream. 20,000 people are there. We walk in, and they're passing out raffle tickets, free tickets at the raffle. 20,000 people. I said, I don't want to take a raffle ticket. I just get on somebody's list and take a raffle ticket. So I filled out a raffle ticket. So what happened was, the 5th race, they said, we have 6 winners of the raffle. I I was one of the 6 winners. 20,000 people, that's pretty good. I said, well, I'll go down to the paddock. And I went there, and we pulled balls out of a hat. And I was shy, so I just sat back, and I took the last ball. So the first person got a trip to Princess, another person got golf clubs, another person, and they come to the last one. Brand new Cadillac. So I won a brand new Cadillac. So as I was walking through the track, everybody stopped there because they had a screen. Oh, you won? I'm sitting there and say, oh, okay. Because I'm not very emotional, right? I won a Cadillac. Big deal. So anyway, we move ahead. We used to go to Hawthorne. Anybody go to Hawthorne to play the horses? Well, my wife liked to go to Hawthorne to play the horses. And would you know, I won another car. So that presented a problem because it was a small car. And I said, who would I give it to? Kenny? He had enough problems with Carl, I won't tell you about that. Or Andrea or Debbie. So I took money instead because I didn't want to have to divide up this car between the 3 children. So that was, but she liked that. Well, we lived in Water Tower, and I was president for 6 years, and there were a lot of interesting people that lived in Water Tower. I'll tell you one story about Debbie. She'd get up in the morning and she'd go down the elevator, but periodically she'd go in the elevator, and there was somebody sitting there with 2 big dogs, and Debbie didn't like dogs. She said, pick them up. And the woman, so in any event, it's got to be a standing joke. Pick up the dogs. And so they had this ongoing thing. And Oprah Winfrey was very nice about it. She picked up her dogs. So she lived in the floor above us. She had 4 apartments that she combined, and she lived in Water Tower. And so her and Dippy got along as long as she picked up the dogs. So that was one of the stories that I like telling about. So we lived in Water Tower. I lived there for 30 years, and it worked out very well. I was president. But I have to tell you about a couple of problems we had for people who wouldn't want to live in Water Tower because of these 2 problems. Now, what were the 2 problems? One of the problems was they built all our plumbing with cast iron pipes, and we had to replace them for the tune of $13 million to replace all our plumbing. Well, that wasn't very nice. That was a big assessment. So anyway, that was one thing. And then we had another problem. Remember the Amico building? The Amico building had this marble cladding, and they had it built. Water Tower was built with the same cladding. So therefore, we had gotten advice from somebody in the building, and they said, we have to reclad the whole building, the tune of, I think, $40 or $50 million. And I wasn't president at the time, but in any event, what had happened was we decided, still on the board, we decided we ought to hire somebody else. So we hired somebody from Europe to come in and check our building, and they said, no, we just replace a few panels every year, and you'll be okay. So we never replaced it. But we built up a reserve, just to give you an example. When I left the building, we had a reserve of $13 million to replace all our paneling. I subsequently found out that after I moved out, the people that moved in, or some of the new people, said, we're going to stop that because that reserve added $250,000 to our assessment every year. And they didn't want to build up that reserve anymore. So I hope we don't have to replace the whole cabin, but I'm out of it now. I paid for the piping. We had to replace all the piping. And I paid my share of the reserve, but I didn't have to pay. I won't pay any more. I'm out of it. Saved a lot of money moving out of it. So anyway, that was the kind of thing that had happened. Now there are a few more stories I'd like to tell you. Professionally, I was very fortunate, and Max brought in all his business, and he was really, I think the lawyers and the audience will appreciate this. He was one of those guys that he would holler at you and yell at you, but the next day you'd forget about it. So in any event, back in the late 60s, when I was there, a few of my senior partners, I was more of a junior partner at that point, they said, Max is taking too much money out of the business. He's taking 50% of the profit. Well, he was taking 50%, but we were all well paid. So we had no complaints. It wasn't as if he was taking it out of our hide. You know what I mean? So that while we were making $300,000 a year, and Max was maybe making $2 million, so what? Didn't matter. So, but they said, oh, we want to cut down his percentage. So Max heard about it, and he called us all in the office. There was 6 of us partners. And they said, I hear you want to cut down my percentage. Something to that effect. And we couldn't. And so Max, in his infinite wisdom, he looked at all of us, and he said, how much do you want? How much do you want? So we went all 6 of us, and everybody quoted a figure. That's what they wanted. You know what Max did? He said, you got it, now get out. So he was never going to argue about money. He gave us what we wanted, and he didn't need it, but he dealt with us in a way that, how can you argue about that? And we kind of walked back in our office, and I said to my senior partner, did you think he was going to do that? Oh, sure. I said, you're full of it. No one thought that would happen. Everybody thought he would take all those numbers and cut them in half and he gave us everything we wanted, because he knew one thing. He would then control us. You could never argue about money with him. We never had a problem about money. We always made plenty of money, and therefore he never had any complaints. We didn't have any complaints, and Max took very good care of us. So that was kind of the story with Max and Water Tower. And then my daughter, her infinite wisdom, kind of noticed that my wife was probably a little not feeling well, and she found this place, and I'm glad she found it, because I've been here for 4 years, and I've been enjoying it. Now, if you forgive me, I want to make you look at a few of my notes. I may have a few other. Oh yes, I forgot all about the big thing. Oh yes, I forgot. Now, I have this bottle of water here, right? And it has a plastic top that you open the plastic top, and then you reseal it, right? Well, I had the good fortune of having a little client in Crawfordsville, Indiana, who made beer caps. You know, on the beer bottle, you've got the Carrington. He made beer caps. And Jim Smith was his name, and I was his patent attorney. And Jim decided that he was going to bet the store on making a plastic cap that resealed. If you remember, they used to have the metal caps that resealed, and you put the metal cap on that cuts yourself. Well, he would make a plastic cap. So he bet the store, his company something, on building a plastic cap. And we built this plastic cap. It may not be this exact one, but it was a resealable plastic cap. And it's a very simple process, except it isn't as complicated. What you do is you take a glob of plastic, you put it in a compression mold it, and you press it together, and it comes out the way you want it. I won't burden you with the details. So in any event, we did that, and I was a patent attorney, a good friend, and I had the good fortune. He developed this cap, and we wanted to sell it to Coca-Cola. Anybody who knows business with Coca-Cola is you can't sell Coca-Cola something from one source. So we had to license another source to make the cap, so that Coca-Cola would have 2 sources, so one could hold us against the other. So in any event, we licensed Owens, Illinois, and I went there in the middle of the night, and we negotiated the license, and by the way, that was my single return to Toledo, Ohio. Owens, Illinois is located in Toledo, Ohio, so I went to Toledo, Ohio to negotiate this license. Well, the story about licensing the plastic cap was fine because we had to license it all over the world, which we did. So I traveled all over the world licensing this plastic cap. And I had the good fortune of being on the board of this company, so my wife went with me. Every place I went, my wife went. And therefore, whether we were in Japan or Germany or wherever it was, my wife was there at the expense of my client. He knew it. He was paying all the bills. So that's why I had this bottle, because that plastic cap, in addition to my disposable diapers and my Elmo doll, there were three of the things that I wanted to mention as far as my background as a patent attorney. I've made many other things that are more prosaic, and I won't burden you with it, but since my senior partner brought in all those clients, okay, now I want to give you to the, what? I want to give you to my Tribune article.
I'm sure we will have questions, so
Okay.
this is
So now I
fascinating.
give you the story. You see this Tribune article that's appeared in the Chicago Tribune. It's about 8 pages long, and it says 6 blocks of separation, practically neighbors that just learned they're brothers. Remember, I started the story by telling you that I maybe had a narrow brand of emotion because of being afraid of being adopted out. Well, this fellow was one of those that my mother adopted out. And the reason he found this me is that Lou was adopted, except he didn't know his name is Louis Manrose, a famous prominent in Chicago, and I'll tell you about him in just a couple minutes. Lou was having lunch with his nephew, his cousin. And his cousin, who was 27 years old, Lou was 27, having lunch with his cousin. So his cousin said to him, Lou, how does it feel to be adopted? And Lou said, I'm not adopted. And his cousin said, yes, you are. Well, Lou got very upset because, needless to say, his parents never told him he was adopted. Now, remember in those days, you couldn't find out your adopted parents except if you moved from one state to the other, you had to record their movement. So Lou knew that he had been adopted in Detroit, Michigan, which is a foundling home where my mother put Lou when he was born, put him in this foundling home in Detroit. And so he'd gotten a notice in the mail from a genealogist from Detroit, Michigan. He had gotten other notices from genealogists, but he had no interest in them. No, I'm not going to start. But this was from Detroit, Michigan, which is where he was adopted from. So Lou got in touch with his genealogist and said, I want to know if I have any siblings. So the genealogist said, well, I'll look into it. Now, they found me, but they had trouble finding me. Why did they have trouble finding me? Remember I told you, and I forgot to mention this early on, that I was walking down the street one day. I was 12 years old, and a man passed us. And my mother said, wait, I want to talk to that man. And she came back and said, that was your father, which is the only time I ever saw him. I was 12 years old. So in any event, Lou hired a genealogist from Detroit, and he went looking for me because his name was, his birth name was Louis Inger, I-N-G-E-R. And my mother's third husband was named Inger. My name was Jacob Inger. But my mother didn't like her third husband. So when I was 12 years old, she made me change my name to her second husband. So that's how my name Short came along. So when he was looking for Jacob Inger, he couldn't find Jacob Inger because I didn't exist. I had changed my name. My mother legally changed my name. So finally he found, through my niece in Toledo, Ohio, that I changed my name to Jacob Shore, and that he lived in Chicago, and so forth and so forth. So I got a phone call, and this is in 2008. I got this phone call that says, your brother wants to see you. I said, my brother? I had one brother who had died subsequently. Okay. He wants to come over tomorrow morning and see you. Tomorrow morning, I just get a call at night. Well, he just lives 5 blocks away. He can come over and see you. So, Lou Monroe, my brother, who's the other person in this picture in the Chicago Tribune article, came over to see me, and I opened the door, and I said, what do you say to your brother that you haven't seen in 80 years? He was 80 years old at the time. I was 81. Well, needless to say, there was a pause or what have you. But anyway, he came, introduced himself, and we became friendly. Although I have to tell you, Lou traveled in an entirely different circle than I traveled in. Lou was president of the MCA. He was on the board of the Art Institute. He had the biggest, if not one of the biggest, modern art collections in the country. He was extremely wealthy, and but a very nice person. I say in another, they traveled in circles that I didn't travel, and Susan, his wife's closest friend, is Penny Pritzker. You know Penny Pritzker? She was Secretary of Commerce, and she's part of the Pritzker family, and so forth. But in any event, and they have a home, and they had a home up in outside of Racine, Wisconsin, where they had some llamas. A picture of the home in any event. So he came over and we talked, and needless to say, we had nothing in common since he had been adopted at birth, and I never knew of it, except that he now knew that I lived in the Water Tower, and he lived in Girder Place, in a very luxurious place. He was a very nice person. We became friendly, had dinners together. Never really close friends because we didn't travel in the same circles, but he was a nice guy, and we had times together. I have to tell you a story. I was having breakfast with him. I used to have breakfast with him maybe once every month at the Peninsula, and I said to Lou, I said, how come you're not more a Hamish person? Why aren't you warm? Because he wasn't. I mean, he was a nice person, but he was not a warm. And I subsequently learned out his parents were not particularly warm persons. And so he turned to me and said, Jack, I'll have to think about that. So that was our discussion about warm. But he was a very nice, his children and my children have become friendly. So they had a good relationship there. So anyway, I had that. And then I started to tell you early on about my sister when I wanted to back that. I said, please listen. My sister, as I said, was 10 years older than I was, and she had a feeling she was raised on the wrong side of the tracks, which we were. We were very poor, we were on relief, and she was supporting us. So when she got married and she had 3 children, she moved to California. And when she moved to California, she said, well, now I guess I'm a free woman, so to speak. I didn't have this conversation, but I assumed it. So she decided, since she didn't get to go to college, that she would go to college. So she went to college, and she graduated magna cum laude. And she went to law school. She graduated first in her class. And she was hired by the most prominent firm in San Diego. Except she quit. You know why? Because in those days, when she was hired, women were not, they were given trust and estate work. They were given garbage because the women were not considered to be up to it. So she quit this firm, and she became director of corporations for the state of California. And she was going to become a judge, but unfortunately she died of cancer. So, at any event, I get back to Lou. Lou was bright. He went to the University of Illinois, and after he was there for a year, he said, "See, I'm not getting much of an education." So you know what he did? he decided to forget his freshman year to go to the University of Chicago. So he went to the University of Chicago, and he graduated from the University of Chicago. And where does one go usually after that? Go to law school. Went to Harvard Law School. So Lou became a successful. His father was very wealthy in business and so forth. And so Lou became a lawyer. My sister graduated first in the class, and I did reasonably well. And here's my mother, couldn't learn to read or write. So where does it come from? Well, my sister had 3 children, and they all made Aliyah to Israel. So they all moved to Israel. And my oldest niece, who's now in her 70s, decided to be a genealogist. So she got all of this, she started in the genealogy. She found out that my mother's had 3 sisters. One of them spoke 3 languages. They were very bright, but they stayed back in Vilna, which is where she was born, and they were very educated, whereas my mother, for whatever reason, and I never knew, you gotta remember, I told you the story that since my mother alienated her children, they never talked to me. So I know nothing of the history of my mother, 3 husbands, none of whom I can speak very fondly. I didn't know any of them, but somebody told me some stories. And she had Lou, my sister, and myself, who all were reasonably successful. So where does it come from? I can't answer that except when my niece found out genealogy that her sisters were intellects and very bright and so forth. It may have been in the genes somewhere. So that's where that came from. And so I'm sorry. Yeah, if I used up all my time, I would have. You have some questions?
Oh, I bet we have some questions. This is like listening to 3 lives, and still, I have a sense that there's more.
Yeah,
I'm sure. I'm sure there's more. I'm just wondering how old was your mother when she passed?
She was 60.
Oh, she was young.
63, 64. Yeah.
So at that point, where were you in your life?
I was just moving to a job at General Electric when she passed away, and unfortunately, she lived alone while her son lived a block away. He had nothing to do with her, and I was her other son, and I was probably not as observant or as caring as I should have been. But I don't use this as an excuse, but because of the fact that I had this emotional problem in my life, it got a big deal with me, and I'm sad about that, by the way. That's what happened.
So did she know of your success at that point?
Well, I don't know if she was really happy for it. She was in a different world. I can't answer. She was living alone. Her children were not involved or what have you, so I can't answer that question.
I had my question. Who has a question? Okay, we're going back here for a question.
My voice is loud.
No, it won't be loud enough for this group.
Put your mask
But you
on.
have to put your mask
I
on.
know.
Okay.
I'm struck by the genetics of it all.
Well,
So
that's why.
have you written up your story? Have you written your
No,
story? Do you want to write your story?
I haven't given any thought.
Because it's a terrific story, and I'm just struck how all those people in your family turned out so well. And without a mother, an active mother.
I can't.
Isn't that kind of unique?
Well, I mentioned that because as I went through it and thought about it with Lou, myself, and my sister. But anyway, best answer I can give you.
I find that fabulously interesting. The genetics of it all.
I do.
Okay.
Any questions?
What are the other questions?
Pardon?
Yeah, okay,
There's a question over there.
It's not really a question, but an answer to your question.
This story has been somewhat written with the tribute on it, believe it or not.
Yes, it's somewhat, you know, there was a lot more to it, but you're right. And anybody who wants to read it, I'd be more than happy to let them read it. It's, I can make other copies if anybody wants to read it, they're welcome to read it. Let me read it, just look through my notes, I may have a few other tidbits that I do want to add. Does anybody have any other questions?
When I first heard a part of Jack's story, I was fascinated about the how a child can live through certain traumas, which certainly having an absent father, well, that does happen, but having a mother who perhaps can't instill in you the importance of education, or can be the buffer between you and a school and different things like that. And still, again, we go back to the genetics. There's something there that carries you through, even though you don't have what so many of us had. A great number of us are depression children. We lived in those times, and we know what it was maybe to have a single parent. But usually we did have the support, and some of us, I mean, I didn't know I was poor because everybody around me didn't have any more than our family did, and so I thought that was what the world was like. But Jack didn't have the supports that many of us had. You found something.
Yeah, it was interesting that I said I was a survivor and I was in prison. Oh, my mic off? Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I look back on this history of mine as I was kind of working it out, and I was really saddened by the effect that while I was very lucky in certain respects, that, for example, a fellow called me from Washington to go in the patent office. It was a fluke. Just happened. I had any thought of being a patent attorney. I had an engineering degree, but I didn't. So, out of nowhere, my sister teaching me bridge just happened, and he remembered me as a bridge player, not as a patent attorney. He just remembered me as a bridge player. So that I've been lucky in many respects. Although I have to say that my analyst said, Jack, you keep saying that, but even if you hadn't been a successful patent attorney, you'd probably have a chain of dry cleaning stores, but you would have made it. I mean, it's just because, you know, you normally think of guidance and what happens to you. You know, I was totally unguided, but I was lucky. I mean, I went with a law firm who brought in business. For any of those who started lawyers know that if you don't have business, you don't succeed. So I doubt if I would have been successful, except I ended up with a firm who had more business than they know what to do with. So therefore, I didn't need to bring in business. By the way, it was sad. I remember when Max turned 65 or something, he couldn't bring in business anymore. And why? He would go to his friend Joe at the country club and said, Joe, I don't get any business from you anymore. You know what Joe says? My son runs the business. I'm sure you've all had that experience. And the same thing happens in law firms. Law firms, you get business from your contemporaries. And therefore, when he turns, just use it as an artificial thing, they say, my son runs a business, I don't have anything to do with it anymore. So that was a shocker to him, but it's reality. So of course he didn't need the money, although I always like to tell a story about Max. It's what you can relate to that's important. If you can relate to something, you evaluate it one way, and if you can't relate to it, it's a different story. So I tell a story about Max. He was a poor boy from Hartford, Connecticut, who was aggressive and became a very successful guy attorney. But he used to buy his coffee at Pixley and Ellers, and he'd spend a nickel for it. For him to spend $3 for a cup of coffee, he said, he had millions, so that was not an issue. But he could relate to the cup of coffee. Now, he belonged to a country club that must have cost him $30,000, $40,000 a year. He couldn't relate to that. So he paid whatever it was. I mean, money wasn't an issue. It's just what you could relate to. And there's a story there. But you got any more, anything else? I tried to, I hope I kept it entertaining. Anybody have any questions? I'd be glad to answer. Any of my children have any questions?
Great job. You did a great job.
That's a good question. Now we're going to have all the children talk, right? We will be having this program so that you can tell your stories every Monday night, the second and fourth Monday nights. Thank you, Julie. And I do have a sign-up sheet. Several of you people have said that you would like to share your stories. They may not be as lengthy because we heard practically from birth today, and that was wonderful and certainly very unique. But your story doesn't have to be that extensive, but we'd love to get to know all of you. We're a community here, and it's a pleasure to know about you. So I'll leave the sign-up sheet here. You're not allowed to take Elmo, because if anyone's going to take Elmo, I am, then he's not going to let me. So thank you everyone for coming. I mean, this is great fun. And thank you, Jeff, for sharing a very almost intimate life. This is beautiful, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Glad to do it.